Performance spaces include the school hall and the Farrar Theatre, and 2 halls dedicated to music, the Parry Hall and the Music Hall. Many instruments are taught, including obscure ones, such as the didgeridoo. By contrast, the successful comprehensive school in which I was privileged to work for 20 years, a school whose most able pupils were able to come here, to Cambridge, if they wished, boasted, if I may use the term, 1 music room and 2 practice rooms, 3 pianos, one of which was broken, and a cupboard, of the doors of which were coming off the hinges, which contained some tambourines. During the 1990s, the school was forced to abandon its policy of free peripatetic music tuition to all pupils who showed any aptitude because of shortage of funds. There was certainly no money to teach anybody how to play a didgeridoo. But it is not only in material resources, Mr. President, that the private sector outspends the public one. Currently, around 7% of school children in Britain attend private schools, a figure which has hardly shifted over many decades. And yet 14% of the teaching force, itself trained at public expense, is employed in the private sector. Teachers in private schools are more likely to have master's degrees, according to the London School of Economics, this is, more likely to have master's degrees or doctorates, more likely to have attended prestigious universities, such as this one, and shortage subjects such as maths and physics are more likely to be properly staffed. And this is not surprising. Working conditions and often pay in the private sector are much better. Classes are smaller. Accommodation and equipment are more lavish. Terms are shorter. Ill-conceived government initiatives can be ignored. And don't underrate that. Above all, private schools do not have to deal with the chaotic children of the urban poor. It can be very demanding and very difficult. It is not surprising that they are more attractive places in which to teach. As a result of this generous staffing achieved by the sector having in real terms doubled its fees during the last 20 years, classes are much smaller than in most state schools, and specialist teaching is much more likely to be available. Research published this year by the LSE suggests that the tendency of the private sector to acquire for itself a disproportionate share of teaching of both newly qualified and experienced teachers is not static, but is actually on the increase. The unwillingness of the rich and the powerful to have a meaningful stake in public education not only concentrates resources in the private sector to the detriment of the great majority, but it ensures that public education is seen to be second best and of low status. State education is deemed by the rich and powerful to be for hoi polloi, to be chosen by those who cannot afford better. And those dissidents who can afford it, but do not choose it, are deemed to be eccentric, unwilling to make the sacrifices that independent head teachers like to attribute to the parents of their pupils. Sacrifices that you can see any day by the collection of old bangers in which the parents roll up to school events. This attitude reinforces the idea, one which permeates too much of state education, of education as what the sociologist Fred Hirsch called a positional good. Positional goods, by definition, are scarce. They confer membership of an exclusive group. To increase their supply is to reduce their value. This helps to explain why the private sector has preferred to double its fees rather than expand. In the world of positional goods, one person's success is at the expense of another's failure, and resources are to be hoarded rather than shared. The notion of education as a means of taking forward all of our nation towards a better future is simply not compatible with the idea that education is a means of obtaining advantages for individuals at the expense of the others. Yet, this is what private sector education in Britain ultimately stands for, the success of the few at the expense of the many. Mr. President, relative to the size of our economy, present difficulties notwithstanding, we are not and have never been a well-educated nation. In the most recent comparisons of educational performance among OECD countries, made 2 years ago, Britain, fourth wealthiest nation, came 8th in science, 13th in reading, 80 in mathematics, top in mathematics, top in science, second in reading was Finland, a country which has no private sector, and where all children attend their local comprehensive school from infancy to young adulthood. A country in which access to the best educational resources is equally available to all. Ought not this to serve as a lesson to us, Mr. President? We who for 140 years have had an educational structure designed to rule a long-vanished empire, but which now serves only to entrench the privileges of wealth and social class, while the talents of so many of our young people are not developed. Is it not time we look for something better? I beg to propose the motion.
Very much indeed for his remarks. And to open the case for the opposition, call upon the former head of the Independent Schools Council, Admiral Chris Parry.
Mr. President, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here in Cambridge today. What W.H. Auden said was a fountain of knowledge where students gather to drink. And I'm glad to see, walking along the road, that the traditions haven't changed. But I do find myself wondering whether this proposition is a hangover from the past, as Michael indicated, and that somehow, listening to Michael, we might have been transported back to a TV programme called Life on Mars. Quite extraordinary. I had fish tonight, very nice fish, well cooked by the union. I wondered why there were no potatoes on the plate. The answer is the chips are all in here. It's quite extraordinary. You heard a speech there absolutely laden with the language of class war, of all sorts of allusions to a country that I don't recognise. It's something that I saw in my youth perhaps, but not today. Let's lay this rich and powerful thing to bed. The person who fixes my radiators, my plumber, sends his son to the same school as mine, an independent school. And he, like me, breaks the bank to send my son to school. I'm not rich. I'm not particularly powerful. I had to spend 37 years at sea to make sure my children go to a good school. But why is that? We all agree that Britain, like any other country, can't survive in a competitive world today unless we provide proper educational provision. And it's a personal tragedy as well as a national disgrace that many of our best young people are still not able to discover or fulfil their true potential. And yet this is a system, a publicly funded system, that's had £186 billion put into it over the last 11 years above the normal provision. And it's worth emphasising, as Michael did, the OECD figures. Let's just look at that, shall we? At the league table. I can give you some more up-to-date figures than Michael, the 2008 figures, okay? The UK lies second behind God knows why, New Zealand, okay? And why does it lie second? Because if you take out the independent sector, we zoom down to number 18, almost the Eurovision Song Contest level of achievements. And could it be that the 40-year experiment, which your olders and betters have been engaged in with comprehensive education, has failed? And nobody is telling the Emperor that actually his clothing is at the dry cleaners. It was meant to provide